Welcome, everyone, and good morning. I'm very excited to welcome you to our first Michigan Athena webinar in 2025, Mastering Multi-Generational Leadership. Today, we will be talking about leadership from the perspective of generational differences. In today's work environment, we're experiencing the most generations in the workforce, so I'm very excited for this opportunity today. We always strive to make these opportunities as interactive as possible to support you on your journey. So please make sure that you use the chat box and Q&A features to drop messages, questions, comments, anything to elevate the conversation and have your voices heard throughout the discussion. We appreciate the activity and excitement in the chat box, so keep it up. Let's use today to connect with our speakers and each other. I could go on and on about this program, but without our sponsors, we wouldn't be here making these waves and having these important conversations. So let's start by thanking our generous friends at Consumers Energy for their continued support year after year. We'll also want to thank Lake Trust for their amazing support over the years and encouraging this path with Michigan Athena. A very special thank you to our wonderful partners also at Amerisure for their new gold membership this year. And we can't forget our friends at Hastings Insurance for their support over the years, as well as our returning sponsor, WM. And our bronze sponsor here with us today is West Shore Bank. So before we dive into leading diverse teams in 2025, I'm excited to share an opportunity to elevate your leadership journey by welcoming you to our Athena leadership community. You may have heard of our new membership, but I guess it's really not that new anymore. We launched it at our Leadership Summit in 2024. It's in September, and we sold out of our membership tumblers on site. These little things right here. Why the excitement? Well, let me begin with our network. Michigan Athena is a community of over 3,000 women and men across our state, and we've grown by over 250% in the last few years, and that is in large part due to you and your networks, and really why you're here with us today. So ask yourself, what inspired you to come today? Was it our topic on leadership? Was it resources, our chat box, engaging speakers? Are you craving something that you can't quite put your finger on? That's why we decided to elevate these opportunities and take your Athena journey to the next level. I mean, when we can pull in 800 plus on a webinar and sell out a leadership summit 2 months in advance, we know we have your attention and we're doing something right, right? And as a statewide business foundation, the Michigan Chamber Foundation has the reach and ability to curate the connections and deliver the information that you're looking for on your journey. So we've spent the last few years listening to you, and we want to keep listening. You've given us so many good ideas, so much feedback, and the best kind of support throughout our journey in building these opportunities for you. And I hope you know that this is about you and 100% for you. And this event is a perfect example of a topic straight out of our survey results. We want to listen and provide what you're looking for. So there's more, and we're happy to share that with you. The QR code on your screen can get you to our membership landing page. And if you sign up while we're here, we will send you the toolkit that we have alongside of the webinar so that you can follow along with us and to continue to elevate that journey with Michigan Athena and take your professional and personal growth to the next level. But as a twist today, and I know we already have a few people signed up, we have 5 extra of these Michigan Athena tumblers today that we're going to be giving away as well. So if you join, you'll be eligible to receive a free tumbler along with your membership. We will randomly select our tumbler recipients after our event, and we'll announce them in our online community. So I look forward to truly growing our community and look forward to, even further supporting you on your journey today. But let's get to the panel. This is going to be a great conversation with some amazing leaders. So let's be bold and ask questions with intention today. To make a few remarks, please help me welcome Teresa Dubiel, EVP Chief Experience Officer with Lake Trust, as one of our amazing presenting sponsors. She's dedicated to Michigan Athena and is also one of our Michigan Athena members. She's an absolute professional, and we are excited to have her with us today. So with that, I'll let her take it from here.
Thank you, Becky. Good morning, everyone. Lake Trust Credit Union is proud to be a co-presenting sponsor for the series that empower women and provides great topics for us to explore and grow. At Lake Trust, we continue to lift one another, empower well-being in our communities with our members, our team members, and look for ways to multiply positive impact throughout the state of Michigan. Throughout this series, there's been great topics, wonderful presenters, and a robust panelists that have shared inspirational nuggets that apply both in our career and our personal life. We are proud of our partnership with Michigan Athena and the Michigan Chamber and the ongoing impact we can make together. You'll see Lake Trust Credit Union in communities throughout Michigan. We are eager to advance the well-being of families and businesses. At this time, I'm honored to introduce Caitlin Tetrick. She's the Executive Director of Coworker Experience at Consumer Energy. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I am so excited and honored to be here. So happy that Consumers Energy is a presenting sponsor here. I love being in the presence of women who are focused on learning from each other and lifting each other up. My niece is actually named Athena, and I told her that I was going to be presenting at this event, and she said, well, you're going to be with a lot of awesome ladies then. And so I'm very excited. I want to thank the Michigan Chamber for creating forums like this. This is such a worthy cause for all of us to be together. I am uniquely interested in this topic today. I find that the topic of multi-generational leadership, it's a really easy topic to have a variety of different views on and a variety of different passionate views on. Many of us feel very strongly about the way our generation is perceived by other generations and form strong opinions about the other generations that we work with. This topic, though, like many, is one where the best way to expand our own thoughts is to learn from each other. I know at Consumers Energy, we are at a point right now where we employ 5 different generations. I'm sure that's not unique to consumers, but I find it fascinating to not only learn the different styles of the generations, but how together they can create a really amazing work product. I myself have been in the working world for about 15 years. I started fresh out of college at Consumers, and it was a definite learning for me as I worked through the following 3 things. Number 1, how do I learn the style of other generations and meet them where they're at? How do I explain my own style and bring my unique gifts to the workplace? And then where do we meet in the middle to get the best work product? Now, as a leader within our HR function, I spend a lot of time not only on my own team leading different generations, but really serving as a sounding board for many who are trying to get the most out of their multi-generational teams. And we have some amazing panelists here today that I know are going to get some of my questions answered and all of your questions answered as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jackie Krofchek, the president of Jackie Krofchek LLC. She will be our moderator today. Jackie has extensive leadership experience, including roles with the Alpena Area Chamber of Commerce, Alpena Rotary Club, and Alpena Community College Foundation. She uses her own personal journey, blended with professional insights, to advocate for leadership and workplace culture. And so I'm so grateful she's here to lead us through a wonderful conversation. So Jackie, welcome.
Hi, Caitlin. Thank you. I am really interested in how this conversation goes. This is a hot topic with my clients right now. Like Caitlin said, there are 5 generations in the workplace. There's one inching up, a 6th generation that's getting closer, and they are all so different. So this will be a wonderful conversation. And I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. So let's go ahead and meet them. First, we have Jolene Davis. She's the president of JD Strategic Consultants LLC and has over 20 years of experience in that role, specializing in organizational development and executive coaching. I'm going to let them do a little more introduction of themselves. So you're going to get the brief introduction from me. Next, we have Jennifer Goforth. Jennifer is the executive director of, and this is kind of a long title, for global after sales, sales and marketing, and customer care and after sales for General Motors. So maybe she has an acronym that she uses for that. And then Allie Walker is our third panelist today. Allie is the president of Truscott Rossman, and she leads the firm's strategic growth, expanding services, and driving innovation in modern communications. So welcome to our panelists. Are you ladies ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of questions, and plus I know we're taking questions from the audience toward the end of this. So why don't we start with letting you guys introduce yourselves just a little bit more and each tell us a little bit about yourself, things I didn't mention, which is a whole lot, and your leadership journey thus far. And we're going to just go ahead and start with Jolene since you're first on my screen.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be here. My business is JD Strategic Consultants, and my biggest thing in my organization is about empowerment. So I love the fact to be able to come to an event with women and to help women be empowered by their not only their jobs but in their personal life. So I'm so excited to be a part of this event. As you mentioned, I have so many years of experience, and the last 17 years of my experience has been primarily in public education. I found that this was an area that I really wanted to hone myself and give myself as service. Some of the roles I've served in was Vice President of Human Resources at Macomb Community College. I was at Southfield Public Schools, as well as at Eastern Michigan University. And I find that at each one of my places, my nickname became the fixer because that was like what was associated with me. Fix this, fix that. And I felt like it always happened that way. When I started at Southfield Public Schools, I started 4 days before we shut down the country for the pandemic. And so that was quite an interesting time trying to transition into that. At Eastern Michigan University, my supervisor, who was the vice president of human resources, left, and I ended up doing 3 roles at the same time to make sure that things are rolling and flowing as they were. At the vice president of human resources at Macomb Community College, I walked in the door and half my team was not there. So I had to rebuild the whole entire HR team. And so I found that it was enhancing. Throughout all my experiences, I found that it was kind of a place where I had to change my leadership style. And I finally settled on the fact that I had to become a chameleon leader. So my leadership journey started off with like being old school, as well. I'm one of the borderlines of boomer, baby boomers. And I found that I had to actually not enhance what I learned and how I thought my work styles were to be onto others. So my leadership journey started me off as being do as I say, do my directives, and then I found that that didn't work for everybody. So with that, I found that having one leadership style wasn't working. And so by changing the leadership style, I found that I found more productivity and it enhanced my team and it enhanced me and they taught me a lot during the process. So I'm glad to be here and I'm looking forward to telling you more.
All right. Thank you so much. Allie, you're next on my screen, so why don't you do a little introduction of yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Allie Walker. I'm president of Truscott Rossman. I am a millennial. I graduated college in 2008, in the spring of 2008, just shortly before the big housing bust and boom. So that really has defined my personal generational experience. I started my career in Washington, D.C., working on Capitol Hill and continued to grow in consulting and communications, getting a master's at Johns Hopkins University, and ultimately moving back to Michigan. I'm originally from Traverse City. I'm based in Grand Rapids now. I've been at TR for almost 10 years, continuing to have opportunities to grow until ultimately getting to the role I'm in, which is leading our firm and working with our clients. I have a wonderful husband who's a marathon runner, and he works too, but he would want me to do the marathon running. And I have 2 great little members of Gen Alpha. One is 10 and one is 7, and they're both spirited young ladies. So really happy to be here.
Thank you. And Jennifer, let's hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here to be a part of the conversation so I can share some of my experience and learn from the other panelists. I'm humbled to be among the panelists, some amazing women here. I'm a Gen X. I've been at General Motors for about 27 years and right now work in the customer care and after sales area. We call it CCA, so there is an acronym. I'm an engineer by education, but I've really navigated throughout my career at General Motors between many different functions, whether it's manufacturing engineering, production, product engineering, program launch teams, and accessories. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work for General Motors in multiple countries. So I've worked in Germany, South Korea, and China, and right now I'm stationed here in Detroit. And in those roles, I've led very cross-functional, global, multi-generational teams. My current team is the sales and marketing team here in Warren. I've been leading this team for about a year. There are 600 people on my team across North America. They're in the United States, Canada, and in Mexico. And we have 4 generations that are represented in the workforce: baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. So a lot of really interesting diversity in the team. From a personal perspective, my husband's a GM retiree, and our daughter was born while we were living in South Korea, and she's 13 years old. So I look forward to sharing some of my experiences and learning from the panelists today.
Thank you. So in this group right now, we've got a boomer, a Gen X, and 2 millennials. So this will be interesting to see if there's differences between, because we haven't discussed this in advance. So we're just having this conversation real time. And from what you ladies have said, you are interacting with all 4 or 5 of the generations that are currently in the workforce. So let's go ahead and start with Allie on this next question. During your time, what have been some of your observations about how the different generations interact with each other and interact with you?
Sure. So talking about how they interact with each other first, one of the things I have seen that has been a challenge is when different generations make assumptions, right? They're assuming a different generation is only there because they're young or because they understand social media, or they're assuming another generation is not interested in learning because they are older or not as used to technology. I think anytime I've seen big tensions, it's come from a place of assumptions and not understanding. For me, as I have been a younger leader over the course of my career, I've experienced really mixed reception. The benefits I've seen from generations is people who see me for my skills, right? And which is what anybody really, when you base it down, wants to be seen for why they're at work. When you look across the generations for their skills, that's when I've seen the best support from any generation. Often for me, right, an older generation, especially when I was early as a leader, challenges I've experienced definitely as I stepped into the role I'm in now, people who were maybe a Gen X or a boomer generation who acted in a way as if they were perhaps threatened or felt that they knew more than me. And honestly, technically, maybe they did know more than me, but again, I would have asked them to look at the skills and look if they were applying their best skills. That's also one of those challenges where I wonder now, reflecting back, was it on me to navigate that, or was it really on my employer at the time who was putting me in that situation, who kind of let that situation fester? And that's really informed how I've worked with my teams as I've promoted, people at different generations, kind of leading teams that may be younger or older than them.
I love that you kind of brought in that whole self-awareness piece, because too often we look at others and say, oh, it's their fault, I'm doing everything right. But if we can have some self-awareness and say, actually, what's my role in this miscommunication or misunderstanding? So that's great. Jolene or Jennifer, did you guys want to add anything to that topic?
I think the one thing one approach that I do, because we just went through a pretty big reorganization of my team. And so I've got a lot of new team members working in new groups. And we also tend to leap to assumptions based on what we see. And so one of the things that we've done is do individual profiles that helps us better define who we are, not who we are from an age standpoint, but really who we are as individuals, looking at their different strengths. And then as a leader, once I understand those strengths, I can draw them out and get them engaged in different projects in different ways and recognize those strengths. So, because I think there are things that could surprise you. I have a gentleman who he's one of my most senior. He's got more than 40 years in the company, but he is the first to leap to technology and try new things. And so finding ways to help the team see everyone as individuals and what their strengths are is that something I actively try to make those bridges and connections. So that's just one quick experience that I have very recently.
All right. Jolene?
Yeah, and I agree with Jennifer. Sorry, excuse me. I agree with Jennifer. It's just some of the things that you have to do is try to get at the source of the individuals. I find that during these processes, by asking questions, I learn more from them, and it helps me to be able to give better guidance. Ask the questions. Get to know people on a different level, and I think that that would help you to understand each other and to be able to get things done in a productive manner. So I think that worked well with me, and I think it would work well with others.
So one of our questions is, has managing a diverse group of generations changed the way you give and receive feedback? And you each sort of alluded to that. Yes, it does. But do you have anything else to add to that particular topic? And anyone can take this one.
Sure, I'll jump in. So since I
Okay.
just finished talking, one of the things that I realized is that people want to be heard. So before I give feedback, I have a conversation with individuals and I give them the opportunity to be heard. But not only do I give them opportunity to be heard, I repeat what they said to me. I want them to know that I was listening. I want them to know that I heard what they were saying, and I want them to correct me. So what I will say is, what I heard you say was this. Is that correct? I find by engaging people in that kind of manner, not only does it de-escalate an individual, but it lets them feel that they were heard. So I think that by doing that, it allowed individuals to help with the communication. There was times in the past where I walked into a conversation and I was like, I heard you did this, I heard you did that. And I found that it put people on the defense and they either shut down or they just walked out the room or they didn't engage. But by giving a person an opportunity, giving them a platform and a place where they can feel they can talk to me or they can correct me and give me clarification, I think it helped along with the conversations and the engagement. And so then doing that, I was able to provide a positive feedback, if nothing else, even if something that they did needed to be corrected and changed.
Julian, I think that that's such a really good point. We, in that same way, and as we've looked at generations, we've created really kind of like standard paths for how we give feedback and invested time in teaching everybody to have those conversations. So having one set of clear expectations for our whole team, but then investing in helping people understand how they can communicate and tailor their communications. I think sometimes with this topic, you want to be careful not to go down a road of over customizing based on what we just talked about, assumptions of like, oh, they're going to take feedback bad, so I need to be careful, right? You don't want to get in a situation where you're kind of treating someone with kid gloves or you're not recognizing someone or giving someone more time. So I still think there is a place for those like standard channels and then educating on differences within that.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because one of the things, and I think this was something I really learned when I lived abroad, because people want recognition or feedback in very different ways. And I think my experience overseas just overly sensitized me to that. And so when I transitioned from the engineering organization, which is my educational background, and where I spent 26 of my 27 years, to sales and marketing, it's a very different dynamic and different types of people. And so I very much proactively asked them, I shared with them my approach, and then asked them, how they want to receive feedback, how they want to have communications, and just finding ways to engage them and customizing it for them as individuals. And so I think having that very proactive conversation was really helpful to understand everyone at an individual level.
Yeah, I
And if you
agree
start digging, go ahead.
that. No, I was just gonna say I agree with that feedback that Jennifer was mentioning because it's really important. One of the things I find is making sure you do that feedback one-on-one. Don't do it in a room full of people. The other thing is that I find is going to make this real short is that not giving feedback to the entire group. Sending out an email communication goes, well, see, people are being tardy and you know who you are. And it's addressed to 5 people. Don't just target that feedback to the whole group. Address it to the individuals in the way that they will find it to be helpful and understanding and not feel attacked.
Yeah, it's really easy to say, oh, they're not talking about me if it went out to everybody. Yeah, exactly. So what are, and Jennifer, we'll start with you on this one. What are some of your biggest challenges that you've faced in leading these multi-generational teams?
I think the most important thing is pausing, before big meetings, or even providing individual feedback. Right now, business is really busy, so you get moving at this really fast pace, and it's really easy to consider that discretionary and not required, especially as you get more and more comfortable with the team. So I think that's the thing I always try to remind myself. Because so even on my direct staff, we have 2 people from each generation, and it is very different. And asking them, even for feedback, like, how did this communication come across? How did I do rolling this out? And I think so it's as much about my being open for that feedback and creating those channels where they can be more specific. I think those are some of the big challenges that I have, is in communication, and that's why I've really focused on leaning in that way. And then I think the other piece is actively trying to create a safe space. So when I do have meetings with my staff, I pay a lot of attention to who I'm hearing, so I can actively draw everyone's perspective out. And so even if they defer, I want to make sure that I've acknowledged them and given them that opportunity to speak up. And so those are just a few. Communication is really the big thing to focus on from my standpoint.
That's been really the focus of everything we've talked about so far is the communication, and I'm not surprised by that at all. So, Allie or Jolene, do either of you want to jump in with this one on biggest challenges that you faced?
I would be happy to jump in. I mean, I think I had a huge challenge a couple of years ago with a multi-generational team where everybody was really trying to show the others what their worth was, right? And show them why they were there and what their worth was. How I solved that was a huge challenge. Nobody was getting anything done. Everybody's focus was in different ways. What I did was ultimately use the college or high school group project model, and I paired people up who were disagreeing and who were kind of on opposite sides of that. And what that did is it didn't solve all the problems, but it helped people connect as people. And I do, taking time to invest in that personal connection and also kind of forcing them to do it. We will, especially when you look at generations, we will gravitate towards people who are like us generationally. Those people are in the same place in life. They've lived through similar experiences. There are similar characteristics, right? That's why we're talking. So naturally, you're going to gravitate towards those people. So finding a way to lead your team into making them break out of that natural path and understand why another person is doing something or seeing them as a human being has helped me a lot.
Can you expand a little bit on, you said pairing them? What does that mean, and how did you do that?
Sure. So at Trust Rossman, we serve clients, and so we were working on a project, and ultimately, since I was the president, I said, "You and you, basically, like, are going to do this." I think specifically the first time I did it, we did a full. We did like a culture presentation or something like that, and I told everyone, I'm going to send a list of pairings, and your assignment is to connect with that person over Teams or for coffee for 30 minutes and go through these questions. So like literally just pairing them, saying you two are going to sit down and talk. I mean, I think the key thing is I did it for the whole company. So I wasn't just like, you two who I know aren't agreeing. But, when they saw the list, like it was obvious I put people together who were, having tension or whatever. But I did that a couple times. And I think the assignments were so basic. And so ultimately I had to go through that step because I needed those people to be able to work together on client teams to like do their actual work.
I love that you did that. I've worked with clients before that just basically say, you two just figure it out. And I love that you sort of set the stage to help them figure it out and grow in their career, their professional relationships with each other. So, Jolene, did you have something you wanted to add to this topic?
Yes, and I agree with Allie. It was really challenging because I had all generations, on my team, and I found them becoming a little cliquish, and millennials not liking how the Gen Zs were speaking to them, and so I decided to do something different and to change the conversation and to get it off of that conversation because they would do what I would call generational bashing. Oh, you're just doing that because you're a Gen Z, and so I was like, okay, well, let's wait a bit, let's change this conversation. And And so I had my team participate in what's called like a real colors workshop. And what actually was interesting because now instead of focusing on the generations, they now focus on their colors. So the blues were about people and the yellows were about something else. And so now the conversation changed. So it was like, oh, you think like me too. And so the generations kind of like disappeared, and but it gave them a point of, collectively they were surprised who became blue and who were in their colors. And, oh, you too are gold. And so it kind of changed the whole conversation. It started having better conversations and they started realizing they have things in common. So I think that really helped because I was like, well, this is not working because everybody's mad at each other and they don't know why. So, but it opened the door and allowed them to be able to become more active and then talk about the colors and how they can better support each other. So I think that personality test, which was more geared towards community and team building, was really helpful in that accord.
I love it. Find the common ground because there absolutely is more common ground than things that are different. So excellent.
Absolutely.
So what suggestions or advice would you have for leaders to stay proactive when it comes to addressing the needs of a team that spans across all of these generations? And we'll go ahead and start with Allie on this one.
Sure. I think the first thing, and one of the things that's really top of mind for me is we still have to prepare for another generation. Like time only moves one way. Gen Alpha they're taking those summer jobs, like they're going to be interning like that. And so how are we taking the lessons of right now in terms of how we're leading these teams and making sure that we're teaching them to be welcoming and understanding the next generation? I would say that is my biggest focus. And I think it comes down to what a lot of us have talked about, which is helping the teams understand each other as people, not as individuals. And also, when we look at generations, I think it is respecting that people do have different experiences, and those experiences are really valuable, whether it's an experience from being a older generation or whether it's an experience coming straight out of college.
Absolutely. I'll leave it open for you two to jump in on this one. Jolene, you look like you're ready to go.
I was, but I was trying to make sure to give Jennifer an opportunity
Go
to finish
ahead.
what she wanted to. One of the things that I think that to stay proactive we need to do is put your mask on first. That's one of the things that we don't do a lot, and it goes back to that analogy, which I've been trying to find a different one about the plane. When your plane's in trouble, you're supposed to put your mask on first before you help each other, before you help others. And I think that by helping yourself, and putting yourself in a space so that you can actually be able to engage with anybody, that's going to be probably the first thing that would be very helpful for proactivity. Because I find that when you're burnt out, when you're tired, you're stressed, and everybody's coming at you because you are the leader, if you don't do those things that will help wellness for yourself and benefit yourself, you won't be in the right mind space for that. And I think that's one of the things that will help you to be proactive to help address your team against all those generations as well.
That's really great, Jolene. I think one of the things I wanted to offer in the space that we have a new employee resource group. It's called Generations, and what we try to do at the beginning of our meetings is we have a safety moment and we also have a culture moment. And what we are able to do is bring in some content from the Generations ERG and begin, talking about that, because so much of it is about awareness. And so how do we educate ourselves to get curious about the different generations and the people around us? So that's something else that we try to do. I don't want to say to address needs, but it's build that awareness.
Absolutely, yes. One of the things that I talk with about clients when we're talking about this is each generation, there's nothing wrong with them. If you look at what led them to be the way that they are, communicate that the way they are, want to, act the way that they are, work the way that they do, that all came from specific things that they experienced in their life. And they adapted to that and created new technology and resources to adapt and to do a good job with that. So if we think about it in a different perspective of, well, what's cool is that we have all these great resources and new ways of doing things. We get to choose which one is going to best fit that situation. It's kind of, if we shift our perspective on how we look at the differences, I think can be really key as well. I'm going to have Jolene start with this one. So we know that, and this is maybe a little shift from communication, but we look at like the differences in the way that people like to work, the environments they like to be in. You look at people with different generations that want to work in closed offices versus open floor plan sort of engagements or environments. How can managers better understand and navigate those differences and the different mindsets and expectations that each generation brings to the workforce in those kinds of topics? Jolene, we'll
Yeah,
start with you.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that you first got to start by knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your team members and how to utilize that to your advantage. One adjustment I made was adjusting my own timelines. So you have to know what each person needs and what they need to go. So if someone came to me and asked me for something, my supervisor says, I need this the same day. I would then figure out what was needed for that person. And I would say, is this the person that I need to be able to make that happen? Or do I have to ask somebody else on my team? I find that by doing that, it allows people to be able to come into the fruition of doing things productively and making sure that it happens. I also felt that, looking at how people are dealing with their work life, there's different mindsets. Baby boomers have a tendency to stay until the job gets done. Um, Gen Zs it's 5 o'clock, it's time to go home. They want a work life balance. So understanding that and not getting upset about it or becoming angry about how to manage that type of thing. And so knowing those mindsets and having those conversations, what is it that you need to be successful? I find that when I approach those things that way, it has a way to make sure that that happens, but also communicating to the other individuals as well. Like, okay, you're millennials, but this is what's needed out of this perspective. And I think that by doing that, it helps to bring a team together to make it successful.
Love that. What is it that you need to be successful? Yes. All right, Jennifer, it looks like you were going to chime in on that.
Yeah. So we had a bit of I'll call it a perfect storm when we talk about the work environment with the multi-generations. When we came back from COVID, during that time, our Warren Tech Center was completely remodeled into the open work environment. And it was really an interesting dynamic. And so when we were transitioning back, I had that open conversation with my team to kind of ask about preferences and to openly talk about those preferences and talk about the benefits of the new open work environment. Fortunately, we have about I'll call it 8 different configurations. So there's a lot of options where people can align. None of them really involve doors, so there were some shifts. And I think the gentleman that I talked about that had 40 years, he spent, 39 of those years in a cubicle, and so shifting to an open office environment where, his desktop touched another desktop, it was just really interesting to see the dynamic. But I think having that again, open communication to talk about the pros and cons, talk about how we can be more effective, how we can collaborate best, and focus on the work, knowing our own individual preferences was a really big learning moment. And I think we've settled into our routines now, but it's been an interesting journey for sure. Jolene, I think you were also talking about some of the things about understanding where we are. And that's another important thing about the generations is encouraging everyone to share their moments, their life moments. Because, many of the people have been married, they have experienced a new baby or a new grandchild. And I think getting the team to talk about those things, it helps put things into perspective. So that was another thing I just wanted to add in.
Yes, for sure. Allie, how about you? You want to chime in on this one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. One of the places we have also seen this is in that remote work and hybrid work environment. At TR, we've landed in the place of what we call fully flexible, which means like we have in-person locations that we make attractive and nice for people to work in, but we trust people to work from the place that makes the most sense for them. This is not something every generation sees as a benefit. I think one of the things that employers have to look at and leaders have to look at is that, truly like millennial Gen Z painting with a broad brush sees this as a benefit. And so if I were to change that as a leader, I would need to understand that I'm taking a benefit away. In the same way, like with the door in the office, boomers and possibly Gen X might see having a door in an office as a benefit, an office with a door as a benefit. And so if you're moving to that open workspace or you're moving, fully remote, you are taking a benefit away and having the understanding that they're seeing it through that lens, I think helps navigate those challenges and conversations. And also one of the things we have acknowledged being in that fully flexible, so we don't have a number of days we're required. However, as I've mentioned, we work with clients, and so we have had to really be active in teaching our team. You have to meet the client where they are culturally. So if they're remote work, you can do it remote. If they need to be in person, you need to kind of meet them in that place. And that has been a journey. And I do think when you commit to a level of flexibility, whether it's where you work or something else, it is the leadership team signing up to have harder conversations when someone doesn't make the right decision. There's a lot, I know I've seen a lot with Gen Z, making sure that they have spaces to ask, what should I wear to this networking event? Or for a client meeting, what does that look like? Just because if we reflect, like those are a lot of people who went to high school and college in COVID and started their first job remote. So making sure that we're providing that space to be able to ask those questions and feel comfortable doing something that might not be their choice.
So for those who are watching this and listening to this, we are getting to the point where we're going to start taking some questions. You can put those into the comments. But while those are coming in, we're going to move on with another question for the panelists from me. Well, it wasn't posed by me, but I'm reading it off the list that was given. And Jennifer, I'm going to start with you on this one. If you could just pick one thing that has been most successful to you when leading these multi-generational teams, what would that one thing be?
Curiosity. That I think is the most important thing, is with individuals is understanding them, understanding their motivations, understanding their perspective, their life moments that were impactful, really being curious.
Perfect. Allie or Jolene, what is your one thing?
I would say my one thing is investing in time and resources culturally to get people to connect as individuals. Would be my top thing.
All right, Jolene, how about you?
I think my top thing would be hearing people, which means hearing people who are talking to me instead of listening to be heard. Not shutting off their conversations, giving them opportunity to know that I'm listening to them, and I'll take your recommendations. Let's talk about them instead of cutting them off and just not pouring for. So being a listener who hears.
What is the quote? Listen to understand and not to reply. Is that a Covey, I think, quote? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, it's so key. Okay, so going on to the next question, Allie, we'll start with you on this one. Success of a multi-generational team isn't really completely up to the leader. They can do as much as they possibly can, but what advice do you have for team members to help make things more effective on multi-generational teams?
Oh, such a good question. I have plenty of advice for team members. I think one of the things I often think about is think carefully about what you're asking for and acknowledge it if you get it. And specifically, I'm thinking about generations who say that they value something. An example would be like, I value, like being able to share my ideas kind of thing. You can share your ideas with me, but acknowledge that I still need to make the decision for the company. And so sharing ideas is not acting on your ideas, as an example. I would say that's probably the biggest thing, is that if you have a leader who's willing to listen, that's amazing, but acknowledge that the leader cannot act on everything.
All right. Jolene, do you have something to add to this?
I do have something to add to this. I think that when I talk to the multi-generationals, I want them to understand is that maybe you should ask questions to your supervisor or ask them how you want them to communicate with them. Know that your person is might be a baby boomer, might be a millennial, and you yelling at them, and you're passionate about what you're talking about. That might not come out as passionate against them, but it might come off in a different kind of manner. So maybe putting that into concept of like, well, how do you want me to communicate with you? Or can we have a word, like I call it like a code word. So when both sides are getting heated, we can walk away and come back together. So that might save me from going into my car and screaming at the top of my lungs when I feel like I'm being attacked. But that's just about me. But if you just have an opportunity to actually, be in a different generation, get to know about generation and how they would feel about things, that might be helpful.
All right. And Jennifer, how about you?
I think the most important thing is finding that common ground. I have this experience when I was a new engineer, and I had a seasoned person. He was a brake engineer, and I needed to get some information from him, and I was really struggling. And I remember going into the conference room. I was running early, and he was already in the conference room, and we had a really like a personal conversation because it was like a Monday morning after the weekend, and we talked about what we did over the weekend. And I initiated the conversation. It was a little awkward, but what we found was like we both went for a walk on the same river. And all of a sudden we found this commonality, and it just kind of broke down the walls for the communication. So I think finding something in common, whether it's work related or it's personal, but trying to find ways to find that is really important to building those relationships.
For sure. And I think that's sort of a theme that we've heard a little bit today in this conversation. So some questions from the participants, the audience. One challenge that we face with the younger generation is time management. I just got done working on a huge project with the community college, and that was like the thing that everybody was mentioning is time management, and balance. Even in a creative role, we find that meetings are not being respected, attendance is spotty, the individuals don't seem to react to correction related to being in the office versus not showing up. So how can we make sure the team is all in the room when we need them? Who wants to take a stab at this one?
I'll go ahead and lead. For me, it's all about those clear expectations. I think, many of us were transitioning over the last couple of years to different types of hybrid environments, and explaining what those expectations are, but also the why. Why is that important? And being really clear on that. And I think what we've similar to what Allie said, is trying to find be where your client is, or be where you can be most effective, or be where you could, if you need to be collaborative, there's just different setups. But being proactive to talk about what those are, establishing those expectations, and most importantly, explaining the why it's important is.
Start with why. There's that book out there. If you haven't read it, it's phenomenal. Yep. Did you guys want to add something to this? We have quite a few questions from the audience.
Oh, I agree.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So next question, when younger generations are promoted into leadership, have you experienced older generations being angry because they felt entitled to the promotion solely based on their years of experience? How do you navigate that conflict and then boost morale in that situation? Who wants to tackle this?
I can jump into that. First, the first thing I would say is I have experienced that, and also I don't want to assume that that's why they were angry, right? So I think the first thing is, as much as it feels that way that they're angry because even the way the question is written, which I feel it deep in my soul, that they feel that they should have gotten it just because of years of experience. If I were to dig a little deeper and ask them, they probably think that they have something valuable to bring to that role. And so I think that there is a level first of acknowledging, people want roles or they want promotions for a lot of different reasons. And in assuming that they have good intentions. In terms of navigating it, what I have done and what I have sought to do, other than prioritize my mental health, is, clear is kind in terms of the Brene Brown, like give clear expectations, give an opening for them to share their feedback. But then also, I know one of the situations I've had is sometimes older generations have felt entitled to kind of tell me how to do my job, or have felt that my door is a little bit more open for them because they may know more, or I might have a different relationship with them having been a supervisor of me. So making sure that you're setting clear boundaries of thank you for that feedback. I really respect it. I'm all set for right now, and making sure that you're being clear and I think the other thing that's helped the most for me is being really intentional about having a close guard on my emotions and my reactions. I have gotten in the most trouble in these situations when I have snapped, or I have not prepared myself, or I have acted out of my emotional frustration or assumptions on why they're acting. And as a leader, that takes on a whole nother level when you do that. And so just being ready to prepare for that has gone a long way for me in not making bad accidental decisions in the moment.
Yeah, one of the
Yes.
things, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Jackie, but
No, go
one of the
ahead.
things I find is that being in HR, I have this a lot where people come to me, is like, why did that person get the job? Why did they not get the job? So if the individual comes back to you, or if the individual comes to HR, what I always tell them, I first always reach out to the individuals, but say, why don't you go ask the individual that you applied for the role for, why they didn't provide that role to you? Why was it, what was it that you were lacking that would maybe help you in that role? The other thing that I also do to the individual that is in that role, I said, well, maybe you need some, if they come back to you and say, well, you didn't have a degree, you didn't have this, you didn't have that, ask the person, can you have some professional development to raise you up to that level? Let your supervisor know that those are the positions that you're interested in. Of course, the seniority, I'm in a union environment. So of course, there's a whole bunch of, I'm supposed to have that job, it's mine, seniority, but now we're going to the level of that. And so I find that by telling them, hey, can you do this? Can you also work on those things to make yourself more, presentable, not presentable, that's the wrong word. Sorry. More, have more things that they can look at for your next position, then that might go a long way. What I also do is what you might offer up to the person and say, hey, I understand you're upset about this, but how about you become a mentor? How about I let you sometimes sit in on that position so that you can see what that role looks like, or any other role that you think you might be interested in? Because, we should be doing succession planning anyway. So we should be getting people in line for the next person for the job. And hey, that might be your next job. So that might help de-escalate that situation.
A lot of what, and I'm seeing this in the comments too, a lot of what we're kind of talking about is emotional intelligence and levels of emotional intelligence, and how do we foster that in our workforces. But Jolene, I'm gonna have you continue talking and answer this question, because I think you've already talked about it a little bit. But how do we encourage all generations to have hard conversations and not just ignore what upsets them?
Yeah, and I find that sometimes is really you are being mindful of them as well. I find that sometimes Gen Zs won't talk, and they'll be quiet, but you have those one-on-ones with them and have those, conversations and be open to them. What I also do is I ask people like, how do you want me to talk to you? How do you want me to approach you? Are you comfortable if I talk this kind of way? Asking those kind of questions. One of the things that I think I do is we get the people on the same page. And sometimes you becoming the enemy is the best way for them to become, better at working things out. But I do things like, have my departmental meetings, and I have my agendas, and on my agendas I have icebreakers, so people can find out about each other, and they can ask questions, and they can find a different kind of way to work together. And I find that by doing that, it opens the door for those hard conversations to have, because sometimes they're hard to have. I've had Gen Z yell at me, and I sit there quietly and take it and go into the room and say, okay, it wasn't about me. Don't take it personal. Those reactions are now geared towards you. It's just them being able to express the things that they want to be able to express.
I want to
Yeah,
add on to that if I can.
sure, yep.
There are two terms that phrases that people have taught me that remind me of that, which to your point, Jolene, of like, I think the quickest way to help make people talk to each other is not solving the problems for themselves. The first
Yes.
term is, I heard from like an HR consultant we worked with, is that as a leader, you need to make sure you're not opening the back door. So they need to talk to the person, or they need to talk to their supervisor. Don't let them keep coming to you, right? So that's
Yes.
like, the HR term. The other thing I've heard though, which I think Athena will really love, is don't cut their chicken for them. So thinking about like kids, or when you were like cutting up the chicken on the plate, like I think about that a lot with my team of like, if I cut up their chicken for them, they're gonna keep asking me to do it, and they need to learn how to do it themselves. And so to your point, Jolene, like sometimes you gotta let your team sit in the suck and let them figure it out, and tell them you have to talk to that person, but they have to feel the pain until they do it.
I just wanted to add on with where you're going, Ellie, because it's that middle ground that I tend to try to navigate. And if I know I have two people who are not seeing eye to eye, and I sometimes I don't cut their chicken, but I might, in my one-on-one talk to them, ask them a little, get curious about what they're feeling, see if I can draw it out and then encourage them, you really should have the conversation with this person. And what might that look like? And almost being that sounding board to be like, to role play, to prepare them for that courageous conversation that we often avoid. And so that I've seen some pretty good success, because a lot of times people, it's not something you can practice, or you don't have a lot of opportunities to practice. And if you don't get it right, it can really be bad. So I try to help the team prepare to get it right.
What I
And
love
just really
about,
quick,
go ahead, Jolene. You're fine,
I was gonna
go.
say, sorry, I just talked so much. But one of the things I was going to say is that I've learned that sometimes that doesn't work. It's great if it does work.
Yeah.
So I became a certified mediator, and I find those mediation skills are really helpful. And so sometimes what I have to do is I go, okay, I put them in separate rooms and I talk to them, because what I find out is sometimes what they're angry about isn't really what the issue is. And so I'll put them in separate rooms. I'll talk to each person until I get to the real issue. And then when I get to the real issue, I bring them back together, and I ask them, I said, is this okay for us to talk about? Like, when we find out what that real issue is, and then I bring them back together in the room, and I said, okay, I want you to speak to her, you talk to each other. And I said, this is the topic, go. And I find that when I do that and I pull away all the other layers, but I say to them, oh, she said this, but that really wasn't an issue. But by the time you get them back together in that room, then if they're both willing to openly have that conversation, it can be very successful. I found that I had that even with the supervisor and the manager. And once I did that, they worked perfectly. They came back, gave me hugs, like, hey, we're getting along great now. And the supervisor wanted to fire that person, and now it's their favorite person in the world. So, but sometimes you have to get in there and just like, okay, let's find out the real issue, because sometimes when they get together, they're going to like start ping ponging and not be able to address what's concerning them. So
I think
now I'm
I'm
done.
going to add one thing for Jolene for everyone is that if you aren't a certified mediator, or if you're at a smaller organization like me, an HR consultant, like investing in someone to do that when you're having like a problem, we've done that before. It's better to save people you have, right, than hire new. So if you're out there being like, well, I don't have a Jolene, like, you can hire one.
So what I love about everything you guys are saying, I know there are people listening right now that are saying, well, we don't want to go too far and just start solving everyone's problems for them. And I think you guys are addressing that right now, is saying we want to teach them to cut their own chicken, not cut it for them. I love that, by the way. So that gets to, somebody had mentioned that in the comments as well, but I'm sure there are people thinking, how do you help them grow and learn instead of just dictating this is how it's going to be? So everything you guys just said kind of got to that point. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. You ladies have been amazing. Do you have like a 10-second last thing that you would like to say? And we can start with Jolene.
I think that by leading by an example, I think that's been the biggest thing that helps in all things. And I think that's what I have to say, and I will end on that.
All right, Ellie.
We'll use the Ted Lasso quote, be curious, not judgmental, as you're trying to learn about people's experiences and what they bring to the table. I think that's a great way to approach this challenge.
Wonderful. And Jennifer, how about you?
Be your authentic self, and show them through your actions what it looks like to be effective and to lead the team. So just be authentic.
All right. Well, ladies, thank you so much. We're going to turn this back over to the staff.
Yes, thank you all so much. This was an amazing conversation. I appreciate the Ted Lasso. I appreciate Jennifer referencing, being your authentic self, and just kind of honing in on some of those Athena pillars, but just really appreciate the great, insightful conversation. And a quick shout out to Jolene. And if you need an HR consultant, obviously she is a great ally of the Michigan Chamber, and we would encourage any sort of participation there. But we just truly appreciate the leadership that you all have shown in your different roles, your different generations, and the set of diverse experiences and teams that you brought to the table today. So please note too that our speakers' contact information is in the resources section of our event, and check in on them after the event to just continue to, grow your network, engage with them, and learn a little bit more about them. But as always, our programming would not be possible without the absolutely generous support of our sponsors. So a huge shout out to Consumers Energy and Caitlin for joining us today and supporting our mission. Also Lake Trust and our wonderful Teresa, who is a presenting sponsor and just continuing to share Athena's mission. Our gold sponsor, Amerisure, for the continued support on Athena advocacy, and to Hastings Mutual and WM for their support as silver sponsors as well. A special thank you too to West Shore Bank as a bronze sponsor of our 2025 series. But as we think about our conversation and our takeaways, how to upskill your leadership perspective and shape it to, current and future generations, as Allie had mentioned, this is just the tip of the iceberg on what sorts of leadership educational opportunities that we offer here through Michigan Athena that we provide to our members and to our community. Our Athena membership toolkit that accompanies this webinar is just another tool to reflect on as you continue that journey, growth journey as a leader, and we look forward to continuing that progress and journey. So join us. Let's connect and get you started with either a membership or an employee resource group. So please check out the QR code here or just reach out to any one of us on the team and we'd be happy to get you started. But as you're joining our growing membership community, please continue to also give us your feedback. We crave those opportunities to build your ideas into the next event, just as we did today. And, truly the reason for bringing the Athena community together. So please take the time to share your feedback on the event and just give us notes for the future. But as always, make it an amazing day. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Keep up the great work in your personal and professional life. You're courageous, confident, and curious, so keep it up, and we'll see you at the next event soon.